Fala pessoal, tudo bem? Gabriel começando mais um vídeo aqui pra vocês. E rapaz, finalmente foi mostrado o desempenho de Crimson Desert no PlayStation, cara. Finalmente, né? Na verdade, nos consoles, a Digital Foundry lançou um vídeo aí de meia hora e a gente vai assistir aqui juntos. Era o que faltava aí pra gente ver do jogo, como que ele vai estar rodando nos consoles e a gente vai poder aí matar a nossa curiosidade pra quem for pegar o game nos consoles, vai poder ficar mais tranquilo aí, porque vai ter uma noção de como que o game vai estar aí nas plataformas, nos consoles, tá? Gabiru falando aqui com vocês, já te convido a se inscrever, se inscreve aí, estamos com a meta dos 3.000 inscritos, a sua inscrição é muito importante, deixe seu like também, e seu comentário se você está hypado aí pra Crimson Desert e em qual plataforma vocês vão pegar, tá? Sem mais enrolação, bora aí assistir o vídeo juntos, rolou! Ou a noite no jogo também tá bonito. Esse jogo tá todo bonito. Puta que pariu.
When you attempt to explain a game like Crimson Desert to a colleague, it almost sounds like a fake game that you might have tried to pass off to your classmates back in the day. Like, I drifted my horse around the fields before stumbling into a giant circus performance.
Olha o
After
circo, a
which I
gente não tinha
made
visto
my
ele
way to the
totalmente assim,
hills
né,
of the
por
great
dentro,
bug
né?
wars between giant metallic insects
Olha
and
os
gun-toting
insetos
soldiers
mecânicos.
before visiting the fortress of the giant robots. After which I took a stroll along the
A noite
beach
parece que tá
before
muito bonita.
stumbling into a large city where I became a wanted criminal, only to escape by jumping off the castle's wall, to then find myself lost in a rainforest during a storm at night, before eventually emerging out into the Crimson Desert itself and climbing to its highest point to see the world that I had just traversed. Oh, and there's dragons you can fly around on, and giant bosses like Shadow of the Colossus, and you can swing like Spider-Man, and the combat makes you feel
Caraca,
like
vocês viram aquele
medieval
boss
John
ali?
Wick. Like,
Mano, esse
seriously,
jogo
I'm
não
not
cansa
one
de
to normally get
surpreender. É
excited about open world
inacreditável.
games, as followers of DF might know, but
Inacreditável.
Crimson Desert is crazy and ambitious in a way that I quickly became enamored with. I just wanted to see what was over the next hill. It really brought back that thrill of exploration. But all this ambition does not come for free, and nearly all of the
Olha os
promotional footage
cavalos
leading up to launch
que a
has
gente
focused
pode
on the
domar, né?
PC version, which looks
Tem vários
obscenely
vídeos
good,
aí no
leaving people to
canal
wonder,
pra vocês aí
did they
sobre o game.
hide the
Vão lá e
console
assistam, bem
version?
legais.
Is
Tudo
it
que saiu
actually
sobre o
any
game
good?
foi muito legal.
Well, DF friends, wonder no more. Everything you've been seeing here today thus far has been captured from the console version of the game, and today we'll be exploring that experience. For this
Muito
initial
legal. É
video,
o que
however, there
faltava.
is a word of caution. We've only had access to the PlayStation 5 Pro version thus far, but fear not, the
Ó,
other consoles are
PlayStation
incoming
5
soon.
Pro então, pessoal.
We'll
O
tackle
teste
them in
aí
due
é no
time.
Pro, não é no
For
base.
now, though, let's dive in.
Mas já vai dar pra gente ter uma noção aí, né? De como que tá nos consoles, mesmo sendo o Pro. Seria legal se fosse no base também, que é o que a maioria tem, né? Mas
Crimson Desert is a rare and exciting moment for us at Digital Foundry. In a landscape where Unreal Engine has become the default, and where its strengths and weaknesses are now largely predictable, Pearl Abyss has arrived with something genuinely new to explore. Their Black Space engine delivers results that are nothing short of remarkable.
bom, vamos ver como é que
Yeah,
o
there's
jogo usa aí
some
nas
jank
nossas
to
mãos, né?
contend
Mas
with,
essa
of course, and we'll
Black
get to that,
Engine,
but
Black
the
Engine
overall impression,
né,
at
que é
least, is
a engine
striking.
própria ainda pela Biz,
From
parece ser muito
performance
bonita,
to
né,
crowd
guys?
behavior, animation, freedom, foliage, lighting, everything. It is a stunning game. And on PS5 Pro here, you actually don't lose that much. For starters, the game's ray tracing features are fully present and accounted for on the Pro.
Ah,
The ray
legal.
traced diffuse global illumination we highlighted in our PC preview, the per pixel solution, yeah, it's enabled here. This gives the game a fully dynamic, ray traced driven lighting system. Sunlight pouring into a room naturally bounces across surfaces, creating dramatic, believable scenes, and it's all done fully dynamically. The same is true of local lights, which produce equally impressive results. You have a lantern in your inventory, for instance, which you can pull out at any time, and the light from your lantern produces ultra dramatic scenes, especially at night where light is scarce. Scenes like this are particularly impressive, This battle here
Full
has
Ray
lights
Tracing
being
então, hein,
generated
guys?
by the enemies that you're
No
fighting,
Play 5
and all
Pro.
of it is fully real time with
Oh,
shadows and lights dancing
parece muito
realistically
bonito,
across
parece
the
muito
terrain.
bom. Eu não consigo
It
ver uma
makes the
grande
battle feel
diferença
so
não
dynamic.
dos
The
vídeos
lighting has
de
a
PC. É
distinctive
lógico, né?
quality that makes the world feel
A
more
qualidade vai ser
convincing
muito
than
melhor no
most
PC,
current gen
mas tá
games.
muito
The
legal.
bright blue skies stand out immediately, and the environment around your character shows clear atmospheric light scattering. The real-time time of day system also pays off. Days and nights last longer than you usually see in games, and nighttime is genuinely dark, closer to something like, say, Dragon's Dogma, but with stronger, more consistent ray-traced lighting. Ray tracing is enabled across all three modes, by the way. Yes, there are three
Otimizar modo
modes.
qualidade,
So
modo
the overall lighting
performance.
quality remains intact and consistent regardless of how you play. The only drawback here
Os
is
detalhes
that
de
the
sombra só.
denoiser occasionally struggles in more extreme cases. It's not as speckly as Resident Evil Requiem, but it's definitely still noticeable. In particular, I noticed streaking and noise in areas of high contrast. Even so, lighting is a major pillar of the game's visual identity and works beautifully overall. I'll be curious to see how the game looks without ray tracing though, because it seems like the Xbox Series S version does not have this feature. Beyond that, I noticed some really great visual touches that I wanted to highlight. For instance, particle shadows. Smoke plumes cast real dynamic shadows that you can observe as you move around. You can see that here if we look at this smokestack and then turn the camera around, you actually see the shadows
Ó, que
from
legal,
the
né?
emanating
A
smoke. It's
sombra
very cool.
da
And
fumaça,
attacks
tudo,
from
tá tudo,
above actually do the
tudo
same.
funcionando. Olha que
It's a
legal.
subtle feature, not something
Tá
I've
bem
often
legal.
thought about, but it really adds a surprising amount of depth when it hits. Ray traced reflections are also something I noticed. With so much water and other reflective surfaces, it's impressive that every mode on PS5 Pro actually includes them. The system manages to blend ray traced reflections with SSR and sign distance
Mano, tá
fields
muito
for
legal.
distance
Sem
geometry.
zoeira, gente. Pra
This
mim
is
tá
one
muito
area where I
legal.
noticed a little bit of a
Modo
difference in the
qualidade e
performance mode,
modo
though.
performance,
The
a
BBH
água.
tightens up around the camera, reducing the overall reflection radius. The results still look excellent, but it relies more heavily on the fallback solutions. But honestly, even
Reflexo
still,
d'água tá
it
diferente
looks
só, né?
excellent, and the water itself is kind of a standout. Now, I discussed this with Alex in our initial PC preview, but the way the wave system works is super cool. Waves break and split around rocks, for instance. They wash up on shore and recede naturally. Wet surfaces pick up a specular sheen, and characters themselves even generate ripples that interact convincingly with the environment and other ripples. When you climb into the mountains, you'll see water sort of streaming down the mountainside,
Ai,
right?
mano, esse jogo
And the
parece que tá
way
tão
they've
gostoso de
handled all the
explorar, cara.
directionality of the water itself is extremely
Uma
impressive.
semana, guys. Uma
But
semana
crucially,
ainda.
the water also looks great at scale. When standing on a mountain looking out across the ocean, for instance, it's still convincing and beautiful. I also love how they simulate the penetration of light through the surface of the water, like standing in deep water here with your lantern. But the water in general is just beautiful throughout this game and a real visual highlight. The way they're able to scale from nearby ripples to a full ocean is very impressive. And this idea of scale is kind of what surprised me the most. The developers have managed to deliver this combination of ridiculous near-field detail at a huge scale that you can appreciate at a
Eita,
distance.
pô, tá.
Just stop and look around, right? Every scene is packed with this fine-grained detail. There's an absurd amount of foliage variety, for
A
instance,
folhagem
and
tá bonita.
all that
Cara,
foliage is affected
isso é
by
uns. Tipo,
weather
como se
conditions
fosse uns
blowing
passarinhos,
realistically in the
robótico.
wind.
Que é isso?
When
Olha
a
que,
storm starts to wind up, the trees
ah,
whip around violently
que
around you.
loucura, mano.
But
Que é
beyond that,
isso?
they also react directly to the player and NPC
Que
movement
legal,
as
né? Que
well.
diferente.
Yet it's perhaps the distant
Parece uns
rendering of the
passarinhos, né?
trees
Umas
that impressed me the
passarinho de
most.
planta,
You
sei
see,
lá.
this is an area where games typically struggle, yet here trees far off in the distance are actually properly lit and shadowed,
Aí,
while
ó.
still giving the perception of detail. Shadowing distant trees has such a positive impact on the overall visual design, and it's something that most other games either skip completely or do in a very blobby, simple
É
fashion.
bem legal
And
mesmo.
this
Ao
sort of
fundo, lá no
insane
fundo, dá pra ver
detail can
certinho
also be said
as
of the
árvores com
surfaces and
sombreamento,
textures
tudo,
throughout the game.
tudo num
These
lugar.
guys went wild with displacement mapping. It's not a new technique, obviously, but it's everywhere. What do I mean? Well, essentially, just look at the ground here. This allows the developers to simulate depth within a texture, lending that surface increased perceived detail without leveraging more geometry. As a result, every stone, every brick, and just about any other surface in the game is just exploding with visual detail like this. There are virtually no flat surfaces in Crimson Desert. I've never seen this technique
Olha que
executed
legal
at scale quite like
a
this, and I
textura do
do
chão,
think
né?
it adds a lot to the presentation. But there is one downside. It can produce some visual bugs at times. Something I noticed especially in that first town. Stuff like this, for instance, right? The larger issue can be seen when you look at
Ah,
areas where the texture
bugzinho aí
sort of protrudes from the
nessas
geometry
quinas,
like
né?
this, on edges. There's sometimes
Isso aí na hora de
flicker
jogar,
and
malemar a gente
pixelation
vê, na
along these
verdade.
surfaces. You'll notice it on rock walls, trees, and various other edges, just like that. It's worth mentioning, though, that this bothered me more when I first started the game, but after you start to make progress, you just kind of forget about it. The overall
É, isso que eu tô
majesty of
falando,
the
ó. Você,
visuals kind of takes
né, você
over.
pode perceber, mas ele,
Either
conforme você
way,
vai
it's
jogando, você...
cool to see such a great technique return here. There's more to discuss in the visual side, but honestly, for now, I feel like it might be a good time to talk about the specifics around the PS5 Pro version of the game. After all, a lot of people are
Ó, o
wondering
deserto.
just how it
Nossa, olha
runs, and while you
a
might have a good
textura.
idea by
Essa
now, there
textura
is
dessa
more to
pedra aí me lembrou
discuss.
aquela parte
So, as the spec sheet
do
released by
Uncharted.
This notes, there are 3 modes on most consoles, including PS5 Pro: Optimal, which is the performance mode, Balanced, and Quality. This translates to internal resolutions of 1080p,
Aí, guys, ó.
1440p, and 4K, respectively,
Otimizado
and our
1080 Full
counts
HD,
confirm this to
modo
be the
balanceado
case. Where it differs
1440p
from the user experience
e o
you
outro
might have,
4K.
however, is that the current build we had access to is running with the original PSSR, as opposed to what we affectionately call PSSR2. Thus, image quality wasn't great. Apparently, PSSR2 is planned for launch, but in its current state, I can't really judge image quality yet, aside to say that the usual PSSR artifacts are indeed visible, with smearing around foliage and some ray tracing noise being the most obvious. It'll be very interesting to see how this changes with the upgraded PSSR. But the real reason to use the
Não
various
lançou, né, esse
performance modes actually stems from
PSSR2.
performance, and Crimson Desert offers some impressive flexibility here. Essentially, by default, each mode corresponds to a different frame rate target: 60 FPS for performance, 40 for balanced, and 30 for quality. The balanced mode, of course, requires a 120 Hz output to function correctly. The performance mode, though, puts up a good fight. I poured a solid 20 hours or so into the game, and most of that was spent in performance mode. By and large, that 60 FPS target is maintained. I was surprised by how good it is overall. But it was also enlightening playing this way without any sort of VRR, as it did help me identify specific areas where it can and does drop. Most of the time, that involves larger crowds. Anything
Grandes
involving tons of
multidões.
NPCs or enemies can drop the frame rate.
Foi onde teve mais
That's not to say
dificuldade
there
aí,
aren't
né? Onde tinha
occasional
algumas
dips and
quedas.
quieter spots like this, but overall, most of the drops will happen when it's busy. The most significant of which occurred during the Battle for Bug Hill, as I like to call it. Here, war is waging, and
Esses
casualties
bichos aí
include
mecânicos
the
é
frame rate,
iradíssimo.
which drops significantly, making it far and away the worst spot I found in the game so far. It starts out okay, sometimes hitting 60, sometimes dropping into the 50s, as you do. But once you actually reach the top of Bug Hill, the specific encampment here,
É
we
muita
start to see
coisa,
some
cara.
major
Olha o tanto de
drops. And I think
bicho.
this is actually made worse by kiting enemies around, because I came here before my
Cara, eu
character
achei
was ready
iradíssimo
and
as
would
formigas
die
mecânicas.
instantly if hit. So
Olha isso.
I have a ton of insects
30,
chasing me
eita, caiu
around.
bastante, hein?
And as a result, we actually see the frame rate slip all the way into the 30s. I believe this section is very specifically CPU limited, as it deals with so many active enemies at once. It makes sense. You can trigger similar results in some of the game's large cities, especially when causing a ruckus like this. Once the crowd starts to panic and the guards rush the player character, the frame rate definitely takes a hit as well. Crucially, it is not the norm at all, so don't take that away from it. But it does show you that certain situations can bring the performance to its knees. In comparison, the 30 and 40 FPS modes are largely
Nossa, é muito
more
diferente
stable overall,
quando vai pros
holding their
30, né?
targets
Parece dar
reasonably
uma
well. Like here, I
engasgada
visited
no
Bug
olho.
Hill in quality mode, and we're rendering 4 times the number of pixels here. It's 4K mode, right? Plus, the graphics quality is increased even. Yet despite dipping into the 30s in performance mode, we're actually hitting a stable 30 FPS here in that quality mode, which is pretty great. Weirdly enough, the balance mode actually manages to hit a pretty stable 40 FPS in this area too. All of this can be influenced by dynamic elements, of course, like this
Nossa,
run here
mas
in the
a
40
qualidade
hertz
foi
mode. The
embora,
reason
né?
it looks kind of fuzzy is that it started raining. So I'm running through this
Caraca, ficou
area in the
horrível.
rain. And yeah, we still see some dips here, but overall it's pretty good. Alas, this is a surprisingly heavy game, and I don't mean in terms of performance, I mean the way it feels to play. It seems intentional, but at 30 FPS, the camera and the character movement feel less responsive than I'd have normally liked. Thus, I do recommend the 40 or 60 FPS modes, which help
40
a
ou
bit.
60,
The
guys.
thing is, the game
30
feels
é foda. Esse
similarly
jogo
heavy on
assim
PC, even at higher frame rates, so I think
é
it's a
muito
design
movimento.
choice.
Tem que ter um
Now,
FPS
if
fluido,
not for
senão
capturing, I
deve ser
think I'd have
horrível.
probably stuck with the 40 FPS mode since I feel like it finds a nice balance between image quality and performance. But once we factor in the new PSSR, it might actually make sense just to stick with performance the entire time. The thing is, though, if you drop into the options menu, you might notice something else. There's a VSync toggle. Let me start by saying that
V5.
if you're not using a VRR display, do not turn on this option. It is horrifically bad and clearly not intended for use without VRR. I mean, just look at this. The results are extremely awful. Don't use it, trust me. But it
Não usa,
does
guys. Tá
become
falando pra
useful
não
when
usar, não
combined
usa.
with VRR. But mainly just in performance mode. You see, despite the 120 Hz container, the VRR in this game does not seem to support low frame rate compensation like some other major first-party titles. So when it dips out of the VRR range, screen tearing reappears. This makes the setting unsuitable for quality and even balanced mode because tearing does appear. When coupled with performance mode, however, it's legitimately cool and allows frame rates that go above 60 FPS. It's honestly the most responsive and smooth feeling mode in the game, and as you can see, manages to keep frame rates under control. I did a full walk from one area to the other, and it gives a good idea of what you can expect. Using this mode, you won't really detect frame rate dips at all outside of perhaps places like Bug Hill. Honestly though, when it comes to overall
Esse
performance,
lugar
I
aí,
do
Bug
think the
Hill,
results
tô
here are
vendo que é
pretty
o
good. When you consider the scope of the game and the reasonably high
É o
resolution
Croix,
targets,
cara.
more than we see with any other
Essa parte,
UE5 games,
né, de
that's for
deserto
sure.
tá bonita,
The
né?
results are pretty impressive. Reflecting on all the various big open world games this gen, Crimson Desert is one of the better performers overall. It's not perfect by any means, and I do have some issues with certain image quality things, but still, I think it's fair to say that the console version, at least on PS5 Pro, is very good. So, with the performance situation firmly established on PS5 Pro, we await the other consoles to see how it stacks up there. But regardless, there are a few other cool things I wanted to talk about that caught my eye while playing this game, and to do that, I want to take you on a small journey. You see, early on I made the decision to test the open world, not knowing what was in store for me nor how large the game world really was. So I set a waypoint just out in the middle of nowhere to sort of guide me in the proper direction, and I just went. It started smoothly enough. Riding across these gorgeous fields on my horse, I marveled at the realistic sky rendering, the atmospheric light scattering. It felt so realistic and impressive. I appreciated the sheer density of the environment around me, the grass blades swaying in the wind, the trees, the foliage, the interactions with the horse, the way every hoof matches the terrain. Yeah, there's definitely some visible LOD popping along the way, which I don't love, but given the scale and the performance, it's
Ah, mano, é
understandable.
muito grande, né?
Eventually, I reached
Pop-up
this
vai ter.
lengthy wall running across the terrain and decided to ride full speed
Popinho,
towards
né?
the
Vai ter.
scaffolding,
Não tem como não ter.
and was surprised at how seamlessly you could leap off your horse and grab onto the structure. Very cool stuff. Of course, it was seemingly for nothing as my horse was able to just walk right through here on the bottom when I called him. Oh well. So I continued, and my next idea was to sort of wreak havoc in a nearby field to test the game's physics and performance. That's where I discovered horse drifting, where you can essentially sharply spin the horse around in circles in a way that feels awesome. Impressively,
É o
most
drift com
smaller
cavalo.
objects in the environment can be knocked down or destroyed by
Tá, tá
simply
tudo
ramming
destruindo,
into them,
mano.
making this a lot of fun. There is a small delay when destroying physics-based items, but still, it feels really great. I then rode towards a small nearby village and attempted to knock down these things as well, only to mistakenly reveal an enemy that was just hiding in the middle.
Ó,
Then suddenly, from off screen, a giant guard leaped into action and eliminated him
eita
immediately.
porra.
Whoa. With that, though,
Matou?
I decided to continue forward, looking for anything interesting, and it's here that I noticed the somewhat noisy ray-traced lighting visible along the foliage here, and that reminded me that we're looking at the original PSSR. We'll be very curious to see how this looks with the upgraded PSSR at launch.
Cara,
But
essa
moving
versão
forward,
2, né, do
I decided it was time to
PSSR,
play around with some guards just
acho
to
que vai ser
sort of
muito
test the
benéfica
AI, right?
pro game.
The results
Muito.
I thought were interesting. So after angering them, I ran away and decided to climb up on the roof of this house just to see what would happen. Turns out these guards can climb as well, and they quickly tried to overwhelm me. While the shields clipping through the roof looks a bit awkward, the result of fighting them on the roof was really interesting. I was
Ah,
trying to
mano, é
kick
só uma
them off,
atravessadinha.
knock
Não
them
dá
down
nada
with
não. Tá
soap,
de boa, tá de
etc.,
boa.
and was doing okay, but eventually they overwhelmed me. So I tried to run again, and this time they killed me, causing me to respawn nearby. And it's from this respawn point that I randomly stumbled upon this circus, and honestly, this one really surprised me as well because it
O
felt
circo, que legal.
strangely lively. There was no story reason to be here, at least not yet, but wow, look at this. The frame rate, of course, was a little
Olha que
unstable
legal,
here,
mano.
but I was
Ai, tô
surprised to
muito
see that there was an
ansioso pra
actual
explorar esse
circus
jogo.
performance happening inside this tent, all lit with real-time ray tracing. Very, very cool, right? But then I stumbled back outside and figured I'd mess with the AI again, so I tried to attack NPCs. This revealed that when you first swipe at NPCs, they actually just fall back and avoid your blade. But if you keep doing this, eventually the circle of pain draws around your character, and everything within this circle that is, say, a guard or an enemy will suddenly come for you. What impressed me, though, is the way in which the crowds dispersed. Not just randomly in all directions, rather they actually made their way as a group towards the exit in a panic as the guards then entered the zone.
Caraca, guys, deu um
Which
corte aí que do
recalls
nada
something
começou um
cool
temporal
about
aqui e fui
fighting
recolher a
because you
roupa do
see
varal.
similar
Vamos de
behavior with
volta.
enemies as well. If, say, you're fighting some bandits and you kill most of them, there's a point where some remaining enemies might actually freak out and just attempt to run away from you. You can, of course, take them out with an
Caralho, o
arrow
mano
if
tá
you're a good
perseguindo
shot,
todo mundo,
mind you.
mano.
It's a neat touch that adds a tinge of realism to the encounters. I really like the AI behavior in this game. From there, though,
Ó,
I kept
elogiou a
moving
IA
forward,
do
and eventually
jogo,
that's
que é
where
muito
I found
importante.
Bug Hill, as I mentioned earlier.
Ó,
and
Bug
this
Hill
was
de novo.
quite a
Bug
shock
Hill é
when I
o
first found it. You
Frois.
see, up until this point, everything had this sort of grounded medieval flavor, but suddenly we had mechanical insects, airships, balloons, orcs, all fighting on the side of the mountain.
Eu acho
and it looked
incrível esse
super
mix
cool.
de medieval
This is
com
when
essas
I
coisas
did some of my
tecnológicas, assim, sabe?
performance testing, of
Pô, é
course.
muito legal.
But
Esses
eventually I
vagalumes, olha.
survived Bug Hill and found this amazing orc city built upon a mountain,
Olha
which
que legal
looked
essa
wholly
cidade.
unlike anything else I'd seen in the game yet. The sheer level of detail, the pipes, and the ornate structures really impressed. But it was time to continue. And as night fell, I noticed a city in the distance, and that city seemed to be illuminated by electric lights. Sure enough, it was. This sort of farmland was
Uou,
just
que
spread out
legal.
across the terrain. At first, we thought it was Nazca lines, but it's actually an electric farm of some sorts.
Olha
Very
de
strange,
longe.
very different mood as well. The HDR in this scene, by the way, was very impactful. I loved both the lights with the strong highlight, as well as the beautiful night sky with its gorgeous volumetric cloud system. So I continued, climbing the mountain in the darkness with just my torch, fumbling around. Night is really dark in this game, and it makes navigation more treacherous. I ended up exploring the cliffs,
Mano, e
engaging
aquela
a
nave
few
lá em
foes,
cima, lá,
before eventually finding this view,
tipo um
which is
avião,
just
ele
awesome.
fica voando, né?
Rather than
Aparentemente.
diving
Várias
in,
vezes ele já
though,
apareceu, olha lá,
I
ó.
decided
Ao
to
fundo
take
lá,
a
guys.
left turn of sorts
Aqui,
and
ó.
make my way down to the shore to check out the water and take in the view. The water was beautiful. Of course, I was ready to capture the scene. It really feels like you're standing at the
Bonito
edge of the
mesmo, hein?
world. But of course, you're not. So I kept moving, this time walking down the beach, eventually reaching this sort of rocky terrain. That was where I decided to test the climbing system again, and yeah, it works similarly to Breath of the Wild. You have a stamina meter and can climb most surfaces. It's actually influenced by heat
Caraca,
and
e o
cold
Cliff
as well,
sobe
which
qualquer
makes it harder to climb such
montanha mesmo,
surfaces.
hein?
What I really like about it, though, is the way the animation system successfully matches your character's hands to logical positions as you climb the surface. It feels very gratifying as a result. Eventually, I made it to the top, and waiting for me up here turned out to be a rainforest. And the mood shifted greatly because it's not just a rainforest, it actually started to rain. Your local torch lights up the droplets around you in a
Que
beautiful fashion
legal.
as the area around your character is battered by the storm. Other lighting effects, like this random blue glow from something, produces dramatic results as well. What I loved about this sequence in the jungle is that the fog and rain combined with the thickness of the trees really limits your view.
Cachoeira
It
no
really feels
fundo.
isolated, as if you were
A
actually
ambientação
exploring
desse
a
jogo,
deep
assim, tá um
jungle.
negócio muito
Along
legal.
the way, I navigated
Sendo bem
rapids,
sincero, tá
appreciated that awesome
muito
water system, dealt with a
denso,
few more
sabe?
enemies in their encampments, walked along some cliff sides, including making some leaps of faith, before eventually reaching the edge of the forest itself. And that's when the rain started to let up, which highlighted another cool detail. Rain actually leaves behind puddles that persist for hours of game world time. It's not just a binary thing where it's rainy or not. It actually comes and goes realistically,
As
leaving its
poças
mark.
que ficaram por causa da
Something that
chuva,
really adds to the
elas
realism.
permanecem durante um
By
tempo.
this point, though, I managed to climb up the side of this steep cliff and found myself staring out across the Crimson Desert itself. From the opening village to the top
Olha
of
que
this mountain
legal.
here, it took me roughly 4 hours of traversal and exploration. So,
4
yeah, I
horas?
think you get it by now. The amount of variety and display here is outstanding. And what I've shown you is just a small taste, a tiny path through the game world, a simple walk from one part of the map
Caraca!
to another that became a memorable adventure. And this is before exploring the character's abilities or allowing the story to get started. I haven't felt this need to explore since games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or perhaps Breath of the Wild. This is without a doubt one
Tá,
of the most
porra.
impressive open world experiences I've ever had. I genuinely found myself asking the question, how the heck did they do this over and over again? It really is that cool. And all of it worked great on PlayStation
Nossa,
5
cheguei a arrepiar,
Pro,
mano.
even in this pre-release state. Of course, it's not perfect. As noted, performance can dip at times. There are some visual bugs with the displacement mapping in RT, and in some cases,
Eu não me
actual
importo com
bugs
isso,
like
porque é um
here in
jogo
the
de mundo
desert,
aberto,
where I
gente.
found myself
Ó um
swimming
bugzão, ó
above
bugs.
the water at one
Esse aí
point.
dá vídeo.
Plus, the loading sequence when loading a save is weirdly lengthy, with this animation and music that sort of plays out before you're dropped into the world, which thankfully respawning on death is very quick, and there's no other loading times during actual gameplay, so it's not a huge deal. Even with all
Não tem
that, though,
carregamento durante o
this is
jogo.
fantastic on
Olha a
PS5
linha de
Pro.
trem
They
que a gente viu
actually
no
did it.
um vídeo mais cedo reagindo ao
Which
trailer de
brings us
lançamento.
to the end of our first contact with the game. There's still so much more to explore here. Like, I feel like I've just gotten started.
Neve.
And again, this is
Eu
not a
não gosto
game
muito
that
de
was
neve,
super high on
então
my hype list. It just kind of came out of nowhere. And yet, what I've played here just felt unbelievable at times, even on the console. So I'll be curious, of course, how it plays on other machines. And that's something we'll report on very soon. That's gonna do it for this video,
vai ter
however.
então,
So,
não
thanks
sei
for
se antes
watching,
do
and we'll
lançamento,
see
vai
you
ter aí
next
vídeo
time.
do, né, PlayStation dos normal, vai ter vídeo aí
Less
dos
responsive than
consoles,
I'd have
né, do
normally
PlayStation
liked.
5 base
I
e
do
talvez do
recommend the
Xbox
40 to
Series
60
S.
FPS
Guys,
speeds, which help a bit.
mano,
The
vou
thing
falar um
is, the
negócio aqui pra
game
vocês,
feels similarly
provavelmente a
heavy
gente
on
tá
PC, even at higher frame rates, so I think it's
na
a good
frente
challenge.
aí de um daqueles jogos que
Now, if
marcam
not for
pra
capturing,
sempre,
I think I'd have
sabe?
probably stuck with the
Tipo
full
Red
HD
Dead
as well,
2.
since I feel like it
Eu não
finds a
sei se
good
vai ser o
balance
mesmo nível de
between
qualidade,
quality and
mas
performance.
eu acredito que
But
vai
once we
chegar ali
factor in the
muito
new
próximo.
PSSR,
E eu
it
tenho
might
esse
actually make
sentimento
sense
de que a
just to
gente
stick
tá
with
aí
performance
à
the entire
frente
time.
de um daqueles
The
jogos
thing is,
que
though,
vão
there are
marcar
often
aí
many options
por
between
muitos e
playing or
muitos
something
anos
else.
a gente vai falar desse jogo. Assim eu espero, porque realmente tudo que foi criado e foi mostrado até agora é simplesmente inacreditável, né? É Quando a gente vê esse jogo, a gente fala, não, não é possível, isso aí deve ser mentira. E se tudo isso se concretizar, eu tenho certeza que isso aí vai ser um daqueles jogos que a gente vai falar por muitos e muitos anos. Aí então o vídeo, né, mostrando, não é no PlayStation 5 base, né, no PlayStation 5 Pro, mas já dá pra gente ter uma noção de como que o jogo tá aí rodando, né, no console. Tá legal pra caramba. Como ele falou, ele tem alguns momentos de queda, tudo, mas a princípio acontece, um jogo massivamente grande, não tem como ser perfeito. Vamos ver agora como vai estar no PlayStation 5 base, né? E no Xbox Series S não dá pra gente esperar muita coisa, né? É um hardware muito limitado, não dá pra gente querer muita coisa, né? Mas a princípio tá bem legal no PlayStation 5 Pro. E que bom que conforme for lançando atualizações e chegar o PSSR lá, 2 vai melhorar mais ainda, vai ficar bem mais bonito e bem mais fluido. Então, que legal, gente. Que legal que o jogo aí tá vindo de muitas notícias boas. Eu fico muito feliz e tô muito ansioso pra jogar, mano. Eu quero jogar isso. Bom, é isso o vídeo. Se inscrevam aí. Vamos cobrir esse jogo aí no seu lançamento nas lives. Então se inscreva aí. Deixe seu like, seu comentário se você está rapado, tá? Espero que tenham gostado do vídeo. A gente se vê no próximo. Valeu!